Welcome. I thank Biennale Tecnologia for the invitation. This is a meeting organized by the Biennale in collaboration with Lucy, the magazine I work for. We had the opportunity to collaborate, to have a talk together for Biennale Technology. I had no doubts to start asking Harry Parker, because I had already read his first book that was published a few years ago in Italy that was called Anatomy of a Soldier. And it was a novel, an unusual novel where he told the story of a young British captain in the Afghanistan war and of two civilians. A story told through 40 objects, different, the bicycle, the fungus spores. But his new book has just been published, and the translator was telling me it's beautiful. I think it's perfect for Biennale Tecnologia. It's a novel that faces probably the most important topics. It starts from his personal history, because Mr. Parker lost both his legs during the war, approximately 15 years ago. And today he walks thanks to very evolved prostheses. And in order to widen our look and ask ourselves questions about core issues for contemporaneity, because from his personal history, he talks about identity, what it means as being human beings, and how these prostheses have become part of his identity. And he talks about potential of technology, and he is a lot involved in technology. It's also sort of philosophical book in some terms, because there are some issues, this kind of technology, in general, all technologies that we have in modern society, and it's in general thinking of present and the future of the relationship between man and machine. So welcome here with us. And I would start from the trigger, from the term hybrid humans, which is not just the title of the book, but it's also a condition. You are a writer, you have a different sensitiveness, so you have thought about all the terms, ability, disability. These are not neutral terms. We have fought many battles, and according to historical periods, there have been terms that were loaded with bias, with stigma. So on the other side, we have other terms from science fiction, a cyborg, superhuman, too much machos, too much on the other side of the spectrum, too exaggerated. So I found this hybrid humans, you say in the first chapter, it defines your identity. So I would like to ask you to start from here.
Thanks for having me, and I'm sorry I'm not talking in Italian. Thank you. I mean, it's probably worth just showing you the tech we're talking about. So I've got single prosthetic on this side, and then an above-knee prosthetic on the right-hand side. And this is the one with most of the tech in it. It's got the microprocessor and is an expensive bit of kit. And maybe we could talk a bit more about that in a bit. But the reason that I wrote this book, really, and I think it is a little bit to do with the story of what happened to me, being a young, same age as many of you, and serving in the military. And then in an instant, I stepped on a bomb and my life changed. And there were all the sort of technologies around survival of, keeping me alive. in those first few minutes, and then the surgical recovery, and then getting prosthetics like these. But there was also a change to my identity. I went from someone who was very fit, very capable in a soldiering environment, to someone who was completely different and couldn't do that job anymore. And there were lots of emotions around that, embarrassment and shame and things like that, that we can talk about later maybe. But I think coming back to those terms like disability, and it just didn't feel like it fitted my experience to use those terms. And actually, in the book, there's a bit of a journey where I come at the end to accept things like disability as a legal term in the UK that gives me many rights and that people have fought for. But at the time, it felt like, you know, I didn't really feel like a disabled person. I still felt like it was a little bit, I don't know, it sort of downplayed who I was. And then there was all the, as you said, the cyborg, the bionic person. They seem to be too sort of aggressive and too science fiction, and also sort of lost the humanness. So hybrid humans was just a way of keeping the humanity in it, but trying to acknowledge that there was something going on at the boundary between the human and the technology that was interesting, and that's really what is threaded through the book.
I don't know if you want to tell more about the technology that is behind these prostheses, because reading your book, I was mesmerized about your story, and you go to many exhibitions, you talk with a lot of scientists, you tell us about many opportunities, because the hybridization man-machine is important and is improving, increasing. But talking about your case, I'm absolutely ignorant in this matter. It's a complex but also elementary how a prosthesis can work. But now I realize there's a wide technology, a wide complex technology behind it.
Yeah, so just cut out the translation, but I think what's interesting about these technologies is that even the first technologies I was given were mechanical knees, so they didn't have any microprocessor or any clever control or algorithms that were controlling the knee. And I learned to walk on those, and in a sense there was real benefit to learning on technologies that weren't so sophisticated, because they, in a way, they made my muscles stronger and musculoskeletally, it was good for me. But actually, in terms of mobility around the real world, they were really suboptimal. But when I was given a microprocessor knee like this, it really did change the way I could interact in the world, and I could start to forget that I had prosthetics on. And really, you know, it's like we can get into the way that these companies manufacture this sort of technology, but this is made by an Austrian-German company called Ottobock. It costs about £60,000, that's probably similar in euros, and so as much as a family car, and it has many of the similar sort of things that you might read about a car. You know, the way that it has different gyroscopes and sensors that allow me to step. It means that I can walk very smoothly, I can change speed, and when I stop, although that seems very simple what's going on there, it's allowing me to stop smoothly. If I was wearing a mechanical knee and I tried to do that, I'd just end up in a heap. And so I have this very expensive, really amazing bit of kit, but actually joining it to the body is still this sorry. The table moved, sorry. Hang on. So yeah, the socket, which is this carbon fiber bit and is made for me in a prosthetics center, that technology, although the material science has changed, that material and the way of doing it hasn't really changed for over 50 years. And the site of sort of friction and the pain of being, if you like, integrated with technology is something that I feel every day in different ways. At the moment, it's very hot, it's sweaty. When it's cold, they can feel very cold. I get open sores and wounds. And I think in a lot of narratives around this sort of technology, you don't see that. You don't see the pain. You don't see the friction of what it actually means to join technologies to the body. And although this is a really sort of blatant example of it, we still hide it. I hide it. I don't talk about it very much unless I'm talking to an audience like this. And I think we're all aware of the way that technologies have positives and negatives. And I think across medical technologies, you think about brain implants, they are life-changing, but there's always that cost that's going on as well. And that's something that I really wanted to think about in the book.
In effetti questa è una delle cose che fai meglio.
Well, I think this is what you do better in the book. You explain your integration with the machine, not in terms of techno optimization, but in realistic terms. And you also enlighten about all the apparatus that is behind. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. Okay. So in the book, you explain very in detail everything that is behind it, for good and for bad. So, but the equipment, but also the health machine, the team that is behind all these scientists that work. It's not only technology. You all explain in detail how is it built, all the problems it carries, also the waiting, also the pain that, things that we don't think of. And there's pain that technologies that help a lot, but also bring new discomforts. Among all these things, and we will try to go further in detail later, you have discovered on yourself, but also talking to other scientists, talking about medical devices for other kind of disabilities. What is the most surprising thing that you have experienced? I don't know, the organization, the scientific teams that are behind these technologies, but something that you would have never expected when you experienced this.
Just talking about being that sort of human in amongst this big world of medical technologies, it really reminded me of being a soldier and being within a system of systems, if you like. You're one tiny cog amongst all, in a battlefield, there's other soldiers, there's tanks, there's planes. You're in this big sort of system, and you're communicating with technologies, and you feel very much part of it. And I've felt much more recently, and I don't really talk about this much in the book, but that weirdly, as a disabled person reliant on these very high-tech systems, that again, you feel like you're in this system of systems, and when one part of it breaks down, like you don't get an appointment, or the therapist who's meant to be giving you some physio is not available, you're that sort of point of friction, and that it can be painful and hard as the individual in that system. And I think one way of sort of illustrating that, and maybe this will speak a little bit to the end of your question, is that there was a device which was a bionic eye that I was reading about when I was researching the book. And it's not a sort of bionic eye like Terminator with a little red dot. It's a pair of glasses that you put on with a camera. But it does have an electrode which is placed on the cortex of the brain. So it is a device that it goes inside the body, but most of it is on this pair of glasses, it's called. And it was really amazing to read about this, but you sort of read further, and most of the people who are using it are only really seeing a few little dots in the darkness, if you like, and they use it as an aid for navigation, but it's not recovering their sight, if you like. And I was reading more recently that the company that makes that device was going into administration, it was going bust. And so those people, and it's not huge amounts of people, but those people who had paid about £100,000, €100,000, let's say, to have this technology, that company had now gone bust, and they weren't, they were saying that they were going to be able to maintain it and give them the care, but I think the sort of anxiety and the anxiety as the user of the technology when you're dependent on all these institutions, health services, people, really, you can really feel it as a person. And when my leg fails, I become more disabled. If we're all on a spectrum of disability to ability, and everyone in this room will be somewhere along it, and it's to do with, luck of genetics. You might acquire a disability in an accident like I did. It might just be aging, but I move very quickly up and down the spectrum of ability.
Questo però appunto apre secondo me una riflessione più ampia, appunto, su aspetto che...
Sorry, I was translating the Italian, I'm sorry. So the dependency that technology can create in these cases is clear. People's life, the quality of people's life depends on these technologies, which means it also depends on these companies, and it depends on the market, essentially. And the impact also of a software update, the one you were telling about before, can have an impact. Or the dismissal of the closing of a software company can have catastrophic, dramatic consequences. But it is on a large scale what is already happening to all of us. This is one of the things you discuss in your book. We are more or less hybrid in a sort of way. For the smartphones and all the invasive technology, daily technology we depend on, which is an extension of our world. So I guess this is the question. Is it so? Are we already all hybrid humans? And from this sense, what have you been able to understand about dependency between human beings and technology? Not only what it does, but only the danger of being depending on technology.
Yeah, it's not a particularly groundbreaking thing to say that we're all hybrid. As soon as anyone takes a paracetamol or a pill in the morning, they are, in a sense, ingesting a technology, and so you could say that anyone who's taken any sort of pill this morning is hybrid in some way. I think, the moment we take our phones out of our pocket and we start scrolling, and there's this architecture of software that feels, well, to me anyway, it feels like feels very spatial, and it feels like I'm moving around it. And I'm also very dependent on it. It's something that I don't have a huge amount of control over. So I think those sorts of hybridity are already happening. There was I think just going back to what you were saying in your question, quite early on I was given a new software update to my knee, this microprocessor knee, and the piece of software was a new algorithm that was meant to make the knee even more intuitive. It was meant to allow it to step over things and step down stairs in a way that was meant to be more human. But I hated it because it almost took too much control away from me. And I think that's a sort of lesson, I think, for a lot of technologies, that as soon as you start to take too much control away from the human user, that lack of control can come, and not in everything, but I think it comes with real downsides. And I think when you think about things like AI, for instance, I think as soon as the human isn't the highest control entity, we start to get into problems. And so certainly in my own little way, being dependent on this knee, that's what happened when it was made too clever, if you like, and it felt very uncomfortable for me. And And I think there's another lesson in there, is that the guys from Ottobock who were developing the software were doing it because they could, because it felt like the right thing to do. And it was only when they gave that technology to a user that they started to realize that it wasn't quite right. And I was part of that process of them, in a way I was trialing it for them. But I think when we're developing technologies, the way that scientists, practitioners, engineers develop things has to have the end user sort of completely wrapped up in the process of development. I'm sort of not answering your question anymore, am I? I can't. Sorry.
No, non solo.
Well, no, you did answer, but I want to continue on what you were saying. Yeah, because one of the things that I never thought of while reading your book is how this type of technology reflect an issue that everyone talks about. That's the concept of data control, because your processes have data, collect data. There's also a number of legal issues, also as regards property, the identity in general, and who belongs these processes to, who's the owner of the data of these processes. So is there anyone who can read this data, who in theory are required to improve the operation of your processes, but on the other side, if if someone reads from those data that you're not walking enough, maybe they remove it from you. If you have an insurance, there are some ethical or legal issues, identity issues, and technological ones that cross one over the other.
There was a elderly woman came and chatted to me at an event, and she said that her husband had been in the military and had died, and he had been an amputee. And the UK National Health Service had got in touch with her, a month or so after he had died, and said, "Can we have we need the prosthetics back?" And she said, "Well, you can have them back, but they're 6 feet under, buried with him, so they couldn't have them back." But I think there is something strange there that I don't really know who owns this device. Every so often it gets given back to my prosthetist, and they give me a loaner knee. And I'm very lucky, very fortunate that because I was injured in active service, the limbs are given to me. But you said what the worry is, I suppose, that this limb there's an app I can open up, and the app's really clever. It can allow me to put it in golf mode and ice skating mode and like cycling mode and all these other modes that I never use. But it also keeps a log of how many steps I take each day. And there is a possibility that data, which I can't really see properly, but when I give it back to Ottobock, they could say, well, this patient, this is an expensive limb. He's only walking, 2,000 steps a day. It's not really the best use case. There is a world in which, this limb might be taken off me for those reasons. And I think that is slightly unsettling. And I think the sort of, GDPR and all those sorts of bits of policy, I think where technologies start to become part of our bodies and start to give data about us in the healthcare setting, that there are some really worrying aspects of that in terms of privacy laws and the way in which we as entities are protected.
Appunto, un'altra è già uscito fuori in quello che racconta.
Yes, another question, issue that is that of inequalities that are created by these technologies, because you were able to have access probably from the first moment right after the accident to let's say in a medical organization of very high level, because you were a soldier and probably if you were a civilian, it would have been much worse. So, but you were in Afghanistan on the battlefield, so you had this opportunity. And then in your book, you tell us that these prostheses cost as much as a car, luxury car, actually. And during in the exhibitions you visit for your book, I think you take back a sort of posture and attention, probably of new attention for this kind of issues that did not exist before. So my question is, these kind of technologies, do they increase inequality given the economic model? Because we live in a capitalistic world which increases inequalities, and sometimes this is what it brings, But in the technological world, we always had a sort of tech optimism. We always thought of technology free from any kind of social issues. But you have visited many, you're an expert actually in this field. Do you think this is changing? Is there a new awareness of the fact that technology cannot be handled as something that, as it by itself, as mathematics, pure mathematics or pure technology? It also social and economical issue, especially as regards inequality.
The conference, or the essentially the symposium or trade show, if you like, that I went to was a really big one in central Germany. That's every 2 years, where they have on display all the latest rehab equipment, medical rehab equipment that you could possibly think of, from the latest hearing aids to prosthetics to mobility vehicles, the latest gyroscopically stabilized wheelchairs, massive motorhomes for people with disabilities. And I think walking around it as somebody with a disability, looking at all the different bits of equipment and all the sort of marketing slogans like, life with limitless freedom, or, move how you used to, and things like that, which I know, even as I've got one of the best technologies, is not true. That's not a true marketing statement. But I think, so you feel like you're very much in this capitalist environment where there's those people who have this very large insurance payouts, or they're lucky like me that they stood on a bomb and their governments are going to help them. But that actually there are people who are never going to be able to access the latest or best technologies, or they're going to have to make huge sacrifices in order to do it. So I think that's something that I became very aware of, and I think in a more stark way. I was in my limb fitting center, so the prosthetic center, and a girl was sitting next to me who'd had meningitis and lost 3 of her limbs, and the technologies that she could get off our National Health Service were not as good as mine, and I was sitting there getting, the best kit you can, and I was sort of thinking to myself, well, it was bad luck for her as well. Why am I any more? Do I deserve this technology any more than she does? And I think then when you sort of fast forward that into what might happen. That's, Elon Musk's Neuralink, and if the sorts of things that he says are on the horizon somewhere, and those people who can afford to have, buy their children a Neuralink so that they're, more capable at school and maybe even happier, and, that sort of inequality, I think, really is unsettling, and I think there needs to be far more legislation around it. But again, as it's a capitalist environment, and there's just inherent unfairness within it. And even within our National Health Service, where in the UK, which is meant to be this very, equal environment, it's just not like that.
Allora, intanto io vi ricordo che il libro di Harry lo trovate anche
I don't know, I just wanted to remind you that You can find Harry's books outside, just outside the hall. Think I would like to give you more time for questions. Going back to the book, I still have some questions for you. Why to promote this meeting? We asked you with Lucy, the magazine I work for, to select 3 books that were aligned with your, and you selected James Bridle Ways of Being and Marco Connell Being a Machine and Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. I strongly recommend you these books because they really talk with your book. These books are all hybrids in a way that were written as an approach because Bridle is an artist who writes about philosophy. Marco Connell, he's a writer, but he's also a journalist, reporter. And Maggie Nelson, she writes between fiction and nonfiction. How do you place yourself as a writer? This is a question for the writer. Do you belong to this? Because also your first book was a novel, but it was also a novel through a typical one, a typical book like these ones. They sort of mix reporting and biographic issues and your personal story, but also philosophy, but also history, information, history of science. So when you choose these 3 books, you choose them because you felt part of a trend of a new wave.
Really good question. I don't know how to place myself. I think every time I sit down and write, I really feel like a fraud more than anything else. But I think there is something interesting in the way that those books are, as you say, people who are moving, they're sort of not neatly categorized. And I suppose maybe I fit in that as well. And I think moving from fiction, although it was autobiographical fiction, to non-fiction, was interesting because when you move into something like science writing. I mean, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a journalist, I'm not a historian, but I was trying to sort of gather information around my experiences and meet people in a sort of journalistic way and find facts in a sort of way a historian would, and then go and research something. And one of the things that I found really interesting was reading academic papers that I just didn't understand a word of. Even the title of these things was too complex, especially when it was talking about AI or control algorithms. I mean, I just had no way of accessing the language. And it took me, I'd reread a paper 3 or 4 times and still not really understand it. And I think, so that was one thing I found interesting. And you in a way, you eventually do start to understand what's going on. And I think the other thing that was interesting is that no matter who I spoke to in a lot of these fields, is you'd sit down, you'd start talking, and within 10 minutes, I'd have asked a question, and they were saying, oh, no one's really sure. And it could have been on anything. It could have been about the way bones grow, or about AI, or about control algorithms and robots. And it was always that, I think from the outside, you feel like there's a lot more certainty in these fields if you're not an expert. And then you get into them and everyone's still quite messy. It's still a messy world, and it's complicated, and things aren't definite. And I think one thing I love about what actually Maggie Nelson writes in Argonauts is that as she's writing, she's really, really not certain of anything, but through the editing process, things get more certain because it needs to sound better. And your editor says, well, you can't say this is just sort of bollocks if you're going to say 2 things at once. And so I think that happens across everything, really, doesn't it? We strip out the uncertainty so that we get clicks and we get noticed. And I think being a writer and trying to give a sense of that uncertainty and that the world is messy is sort of, important to me.
Invece appunto il libro di O'Connell che fra cui
And the O'Connor books, among these that you mentioned, I'm thinking for some reason it's similar to yours. It's a reportage that was published by Delphi about transhumanism. It's it's ironic, and it makes fun of transhumanism. It's a political and philosophical current. It's very, very differentiated. The most noble part tells there can be a complete transfer from man to machine, but not only from the hardware point of view, but also from the software. So conscience and thoughts brought to the machine into an algorithm. And we are still very far away from the objective. And transhumanists, they try to fight death, and they they freeze themselves, or they cut their head, they freeze their head. It costs millions of euros. You're less cruel, but you do talk about this in the last part of your book. You talk about the transhumanist word. What's your idea about that galaxy, about that space?
When I was researching the book, I went and found this 80-year-old professor in a small town in England who had he was sort of the first cyborg in the 90s. He implanted RFID chips into himself and could sort of control things around Warwick University. And he's called Kevin Warwick, and he was really great and a nice guy to meet, but he had this idea of transhumanism, of sort of transcending the sort of fleshy wetware that to him glitches and falls apart, and we all get old, and that if he could upload himself into a computer, he would, and live forever. And I think, chatting to him, it just sounds horrendous to me. And I think one of the reasons it sounded horrendous was that I'd been a broken body, right, in a hospital, plumbed into machines and pipes, and been sort of separated from my body. And I'm sure many people in this audience have had similar experiences where they suddenly, their body no longer works, and at the point of it failing, right? And I think just listening to him made me very fearful of actually getting rid of the soft fleshy bit, then how important that is. And I talk a lot about sort of embodied cognition and how we embody our bodies, and how important that is, I think, to being in the world. And I just think the other thing about transhumanism that felt slightly scary was this idea that it could, it would be able to solve aging and disability and all the other things that it thinks it can do when when the singularity happens and we can solve all the world's problems. But I just felt that there was too many sort of resonances with all those horrible things where we've tried to get rid of things from society or people or disability, and what's that done for us in the past. So I always look at the transhumanism, and some of them are slightly laughable, but I do think there's something about the project which is frightening.
invece il libro di Bridle.
While Bridle, James Bridle, is an artist and as a philosopher, he writes books about theory, and he also connects to your world. You attended a school of arts before becoming a soldier, and then you came back to art. And in the world of art, body, hybridization, interface, all these are issues that are very recurring. How are they faced? So having all this new knowledge, this new technical knowledge, how did you reread how the world of the art approaches to the, I think of Sterlach, who is one of, Stellark, sorry, he's one of the artists, probably his first works were in the 80s, who pushed more about the man-machine integration as an accessory. It was a philosophical statement. It said the human being, the human body is more, it's obsolete, and it has to be integrated with a machine, with a new computer at that time. He had a camera installed on his skull. He had also, I think, he also microphone, a new ear on his arm. So how do you feel looking at this kind of art now, after your accident, after your experience?
Yeah, I think those artists that are shining the light on those sorts of things, it's really important. And actually, before I was injured, I remember studying these guys who were, thinking about cyborgs and the body, and actually how we can break down those structures in society that have kept us all separate. And I think there's something about things like Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto that are really, which I look at a little bit in the book, which are really liberating, right? They allow us systems and ways of collaborating together and breaking down societal barriers that is really exciting, I think. And I think, although my experience is very much as someone, it's very medicalized, isn't it? It's allowing me to move. I think my injuries has, if it had done anything to me, I'd probably still be a soldier in the British Army, doing that. And actually, by being injured, and being now dependent on these technologies, I think it's given me such a different worldview on and empathy for other people who, for whatever reason, don't fit within society in the way that they might.
Sì, scusate, sono andato un po' più lungo di quello che pensavo, quindi abbiamo...
Well, you went far beyond. I'm sorry. It took more time. We still have 10 minutes, 15 minutes. If there's any questions, please make them now. Okay, I'll bring him the mic.
Hello. How and when do you think that technology will be able to extend human lives beyond the classic limits, which is set around 100 years?
I think, I mean, I'm not an expert on that sort of things, but I think, we're already extending it now, and there's some of the sort of DIY genetic people that sort of in the biohacking sphere are already trying to look at ways to extend the body. I think, I don't have a. I think gazing into the looking glass is so difficult for a lot of these technologies, and I think again it just talks to this idea of inequality, where there may be some areas of society where there'll be a technology that allows us to push out beyond 100, but then there'll be a whole raft of people who, because they can't afford it, can't then extend their lives. So I think for me, what's more interesting is who gets to extend their lives for longer, not when and how it happens. And I think that's what we need to be more sort of wary of, is the inequalities of things like that. I mean, how long do we want to live for anyway? I mean, it's just like, Any others?
Lì, ragazzo, aspetta, arriva il microfono.
Okay, another question.
Do you think people would be more optimistic about this technology if it was provided by the public healthcare system instead of private companies?
Yeah, as soon as you asked that question, it makes me feel like I've been too pessimistic during this talk. Actually, the book I think is more hopeful, and I am more hopeful. It's just that when we...
That's my fault.
No, it's just when we start to talk about these things, we often descend to the thing that's not right. But I don't think there's any time ever. This is the best time ever to be disabled or have a disability in any way, I think. And I'm lucky that I even can access these technologies. And okay, there's a system of institutions and people that I'm reliant on, and that can feel difficult. But at the same time, I'm glad it's there. And without it, we'd be back 20, 25 years, and I'd be back on a mechanical knee, and it would be much more difficult. So I think I am more optimistic than maybe I've sounded during this talk about it, and I think we should be hopeful. And I think you're right. You know, if we could create a sort of an equality, it would be much easier. Yeah.
Due di là.
Hi, is something changed since you put this prosthesis, and now is something of different? You feel different. Sometimes you forgot that your legs are artificial.
Do you mean that? Do I forget that they're technology in my day-to-day? Yeah.
How you feel your legs?
Yeah, it's been.
You recognize that.
Yeah, I mean, I can go for
your
days with.
piece.
Yeah, I can sort of. It's interesting that they slip in and out of my consciousness in terms of when they're not working, if there's a problem with them, or they hurt, or something's opened up and I'm bleeding, then I'm very aware of them as technologies. I'm very aware of the interface. But when life's good and they're going well and I've got no problems, they can almost disappear from sort of my consciousness. And it's really interesting that I now have a sort of day job where it's not about technology. I work in a university, and the people that know me, the disability, the technology, I think just disappears, and I just become Harry again. And it's only when you're moving about the world or interacting with people who you don't know necessarily, who they can make you more aware of it by asking you questions and stuff.
And yes, now we are really used to see a lot of kids with big disability on our Instagram profile after the 6th of October, during the war in Gaza, and actually how you see the aspect of the war also that is actually the cause that now you have this big disability, and I mean, how you can represent the war now after your incident and what your thought about it.
Do you mean in terms of the disabilities that people are gaining in the conflict? Yeah. I mean, the scale of it and it's frightening, really. And I think also in Ukraine, so I'm so sorry. I can't concentrate while you're talking over there. Sorry, it's really hard. So I think one of the things that's so important is that initial care, where those technologies of survival can get to the injured person very quickly, and that's whether you get injured and knocked over here in a street or you're in a conflict zone. So I think in both conflicts, not being able to get to the people who are injured quickly means that they'll have disabilities that might be much longer lasting. Because if you can get to the person and start rehab quickly, then you're more likely to save them. So I think that's the thing that really worries me, is this idea that you can't. Yeah.
Ci sono altre domande pure in italiano, potete farle, avrete.
Any other questions? Also in Italian. I saw you raised your hand, you cannot hide yourself. Okay. No, there's a girl. All right. Any other questions? Okay, one more question.
What do you think about providing highly developed knowledges to people who are soldiers or, for example, children? Do you think it's something that is available for them, or something that can be more available in the future?
Yeah. Do you mean in terms of enhancing the soldier on the battlefield? Is that what you mean?
For example, providing highly developed knowledges. Thank you. For disabled people who maybe haven't been in the military and might have more difficulties being provided such technologies.
I think often conflict creates really quick advances. You know, we saw it in the Second World War. We've seen it in Afghanistan, where, for instance, this leg that I've got, there was like a grant from the US government for 21 million that was given to the Ottobock in order to enhance it, and then that technology filters into the NHS. So I think, you know, those technologies should be given, should be given as widely as possible. Definitely, I think that's you know, crucial. I thought you were going to ask whether the technologies on the battlefield and enhancing the soldier, you know, is something that I think is good. I think it's probably inevitable. I think we're a long way from it being well, not a long way, but a fair way from it being sort of, you know, the sort of mech suits that you see in science fiction. But that might be a possibility.
Thank you. It was really interesting. I was wondering, since your incident, did you ever regret joining the army, and did your worldview change regarding war and the army itself? And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really regret it like that. I sort of knew the risks when I signed up, but I didn't sign up for any political reason or for any particular war. My family had been in the military for hundreds of years, and it was just something that I was, you know, I thought I'd go and give it a go at. I didn't join because of Iraq or Afghanistan. And I always felt when I was in the military and I look around at other people, and those people who were sort of really up for the fight, I'd always be a bit suspicious of, because I think the best soldiers are soldiers who are anti-war. And so I still feel the same. You know, I am anti-war. I think it's just you know, we could have a whole nother lecture on whether going to Afghanistan and Iraq was the right thing, and what it was like to be a little tiny cog in that machine where you've been sent by politicians who've been elected in. And yeah, that was uncomfortable at times, especially if a soldier was killed, and you know, you'd then be asking yourself, why are we here? But I think it probably has changed my view, but a little bit. But essentially, I don't really regret it.
Ci stava, vai, un applauso. No, con questo, tra l'altro, vi...
Thank you.
Okay, I would thank you, Harry. Thank you. Please, you can buy the book upstairs. As you know, it's a book full of everything. It's written beautifully. Thank you, Harry. Thank you very much. Thank you.